Okay, we're back on out of executive session. No actions were taken in executive session. So the next update we have is operations. So I guess we covered in my executive director report where we are or aren't with the distribution part of the transport route. The other update is the buried work. Syracuse did some buried work in the last week and a half or so. That is all finished, and they plan to place the cable in that before they go away for the holidays. But the splicing won't happen until early next year. So that's a couple portions of Shoreham and a little bit of Waltham. And we are at 490 active subscribers right now. There are no installations planned for Christmas week. There's some for New Year's week, and there's about 10 that are waiting in the wings for that transport route. So the bad news is we're not going to hit 500 this calendar year, but the good news is we will early next year.
Yeah, I'm gunning for hitting 650 by next year. That's my magic number.
Since it's yes, that is our magic number. That will be a great thing when we can say with a straight face that, yeah, we can our planned long term. We're at break even at long term expense levels.
The one thing that you said that kind of caught my ear, and I'm sure the rest of the executive committee knew it, was that under that scenario, break even would also mean that the executive director would be working half time, part time.
Yep, because long term, we're not going to need someone working as many hours as I'm working now. So I think when there's break even at the current expense level, and then there's break even at the long term expense level, or even like should matters really go south for whatever reason and we needed to tighten our belts, I think we could survive with a half-time executive director even now if we absolutely had to. Of course, that's not the situation we're in, but okay. I can't think of anything else on operations. Is there anything you want to talk about, Steve?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. All right, great. So under other, I took off the agenda the VCBB and Vacuda updates because there wasn't necessarily a whole lot going on, but I want to talk about an update under here. So the VCBB, we talked about this the last time we had an executive committee meeting, that there's $8 million in interest on the ARPA funds that the VCBB has available at its disposal. So what they wish to do with that is to essentially, they called it a revolving loan fund, but we have talked them out of calling it a revolving loan fund into something which was more of an umbrella kind of financing vehicle. Because for a very long time, what CUDs have been saying is the single biggest thing that we could use from the state of Vermont is once the grant funding dries up, help us access debt at below market rates, because the market rates right now are not great and there's a lot of volatility going forward. And also EC Fiber has this debt burden, and understandably, there's never going to be federal grants that cover them getting money back on things they've already built, even though their poor ratepayers are paying a lot of money. So $8 million is not really going to go a long way in terms of how much we all still have to build, but it is the start of something. And so this is explicitly positioned in their plan, is that they're going to start a financing vehicle, they, and as well as Vacuda and some other elements of the executive branch and some other private institutions they've been talking to, will use this as an ability to go and get more money put into it, because there's entities that are apparently interested in financing CUDs, but would be more interested in doing it in a pooled manner. And if there's some other entity that was already doing the underwriting and the due diligence and the monitoring and all of that. So that was the concept, and we've had quite a number of meetings this week just vetting it out and validating that. And basically where we're sitting is most of the Vacuda members, the ones that are partnered with Consolidated, have a little bit of a different view because their needs are different, but the rest of us are all essentially conditionally on board, the condition being that it needs to be set up properly, and we need to be in the room when they're designing how it's going to work, just to make sure that it's actually operationally workable. And the flexibility is really, really key, both in terms of use of funds and terms of funds, and because like interest rate buydowns could be useful for some CUDs, loan loss reserve could be useful, fresh financing at below market rates could be useful. So I think that's going to be, I think it's a good first step, but there's a lot that needs to be sorted out. So, but I wanted you guys to be aware, because it's gone from here's a little concept, here's a concept with a bit more meat, and what's the plan for next year. So the plan is the VCBB is putting together. They want to take this to their board meeting in January, just to get a blessing of the concept and to allow the board to allow them to go to RFP to get a technical consultant to work with them and work with Fukuda on putting together the details, in order that would be brought to the board at a later time. So that's an update, a concept of a plan. Jeff.
Ellie, there's a precedent when the state issues bonds, they make some effort. I think they even call them like citizen bonds or something, but they make some effort to get them have a retail presence for Vermont residents who are buying at $5,000 and $10,000 increments. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for something like that, especially somehow coordinated among the various CUDs, so that residents who want to invest in this essentially could buy some of the debt.
That's a fantastic idea, Jeff, and it's also a really good way just to get some more PR and marketing out there about the fact that we need money. Here's how we're different from the competitors, and letting people, because I mean, so this is actually how EC Fiber originally got off the ground, is by selling promissory notes in increments of, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. And so one of the really important aspects of this fund is that we want to make sure that the tax exempt nature of promissory notes and CUDs flow through to anyone investing in this fund. So all the tax advantages also flow through. But that's a really good point, because we'd more been talking about institutional investors buying in, but it's an excellent point that once it's set up, we should absolutely open it up to retail investors as well, as long as they're able to get those tax advantages.
And to the extent, there's a model that we could work from, that was really my point there, and we could get some sense as to how that retail component compares to the institutional component for those state bonds.
Okay. All right. So that's all that I have around that. Anyone have anything else? Okay. So I'm going to move on to the audit update. So the audit update is that Bonnie's on vacation now. The audit is not complete. Bonnie's on vacation. We had Darlene and I had a really good call with her, and this really has felt like the month of one step forward, two steps back. So the bottom line is that essentially the analysis that we did on the services invoices, in order to present to Bonnie the information in the format that Bonnie wants to see it, with the backup information that Bonnie wants to see, we need to repeat that process with the inventory invoices, which I have done a good start on. I've finished the 2022. I've finished with a couple of suppliers, and that's analysis was something that I'll take up with some urgency when I get back in January. But in the meantime, Darlene and Bonnie are going to presumably, because I'm not actually sure when Bonnie's back. Do you know when Bonnie's back, Sai? She might be back only when I'm back. But Darlene has what she needs.
I think she said she was going to be out for a week. I think she's taking the Christmas week, this week, next week off. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I think basically where we are is we have well, I have some analysis I need to complete on the inventory invoices, but aside from that, we have all the information. We simply need to make sure that we're able to get it to Bonnie in the form that she wants to see it. And so we continue to take steps towards that. And while I'm out, hopefully Bonnie and Darlene can connect to make sure that what she's seeing now is exactly how she wants to be seeing it. And then it's essentially a matter of copy paste and doing that. And so, although it does feel like two steps back, it is in fact a step forward. So that's where we are with that. Anything you want to add, Sai?
Yeah, I can't remember. The one thing that Bonnie allowed, essentially, after going through this yet again and getting her to kind of exactly say exactly what she wanted to see in exactly what form. She basically opened up the 23 books again, which have been sealed tightly since last March, so that we can make, as long as Bonnie and Darlene are in sync about the information and how it's being presented, we will be able to make those journal entries and have her run a new trial balance, as opposed to having an old trial balance, trying to figure out what the journal entries should be, then having her enter them and then coming back and redoing the whole blah, 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 blah. So she did most kindly say, you know what, I'm just opening up the books, get in there, do what needs to be done. Here's what I want to see. Here's what I want to, how I want to see it. So that should actually smooth out the last piece of this process, because then we've got a trial balance that has what we all agree are the right things in the right places, and then can look at the bottom lines and make sure that everything washes tidily, which is a big thing for, especially for Bonnie to be able to, or for Darlene to be able to work her way through that.
Saidi, what do you think about being done by the end of January?
Really? Who knows? I think we're done predicting, Steve.
I'm not saying anything anymore. I won't even be able to sign the thing when it's done, right? But
yeah. Well, the one thing I will say is that we really need to have it done by the time we submit the thing that we're not going to talk about. Yeah. So we do have a hard deadline.
I think, Steve, to be fair, that if that all of our steps forward and steps back meet with Bonnie's approval and the bottom line new trial balance, which we should have within a couple of weeks, I would think, at the outside. Well, maybe not at the outside, but a couple of weeks. If those numbers are, and they should be tidy, then at least we should have a draft of a final audit in January. Final, I would guess, is going to be February.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge, and I'm just kind of totally on the outside of this, but it seems like when you're working on a complex project and you have total control over all the various facets of that complex project, you can kind of do a pretty good job forecasting what's going to happen next. But when you've really got multiple stakeholders, you know, and that includes Cy and Ellie and Lynn and our bookkeeper and our auditor, you're always probably waiting on somebody else, and you don't have any control over that. So
yeah, well, I know we've said it about a. Go ahead,
yeah, I think there were things that Bonnie thought that we understood what she wanted, but we've never done it before. And she has a fine line to walk where she can't advise us because she's the auditor. So I think it's slow going. And as I've said before, the fact of the matter is that this is going, you know, it's 23, but we have to look at 22 numbers. But when this gets into its place, by the time we finish this, we will already be starting essentially the next one. So I would bet, and I'm sure that Lynn, being a much better speaker of accountees than I am, I'm thinking that the 24 audit should actually move along relatively quickly, because the 23 will be extremely fresh in everybody's brain.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, anything else on the audit? Okay, so next up is electronic equipment policy. So the origin of this coming onto the agenda is, as you guys all know, I'm away in January, and as you also know, we have this, the open meeting law now requires CUDs to have it removes the exemption that CUDs had for 6 months, whereby every public meeting of any non-advisory board or committee needs to have a public location for all of its meetings. So Steve very kindly offered to do that for Maple Broadband for January, and then I guess right after Steve offered to do that, his laptop died, so he no longer had a device that was available for him to do that. And And as it happens, I just bought myself a new laptop for my travel because I wanted to have something that was a little bit, my laptop's 5 years old. It still works fine, but it's a little bit slow for some of the GIS work that I do on it. And also I wanted a little bit of a bigger screen if I'm going to be doing a lot of work when I'm in South Africa next month. So I just bought myself a new laptop. So I'm planning to donate my old laptop once I've reinstalled Windows later tonight or tomorrow, bring it to ACRPC so that it's available for Maple Broadband for myself or anyone who is needing to host a public meeting there. But it did raise the question of whether or not what Maple Broadband's policy should be on purchasing electronic equipment such as laptops for board members. So I know that Steve and Cy and Adam and I have all had some discussions around this in the last week, and we have some disagreement amongst ourselves, and so I wanted to bring it to executive committee to talk it out. I will say in the meantime, I've checked with other CUDs what their policy is, and I've heard back from only 3, and the policy of all 3 of those is that they do not provide electronic equipment, either laptops or cell phones or anything, to board members.
I will say that while there were some disagreements in the conversations that the 4 of us were having via email back and forth, the thing we did agree upon is that employees, should they choose, we should be providing the electronic equipment that they need. There's absolutely, I don't think there's any question that we agree on that. It really is board members, and that's a big group that we have actually for Maple Broadband. So it's time to sort of throw it out and get some input back from you all about what we want our policy to be, and so that we can kind of note it and include it probably not only in our employee handbook that we're working on, but also in some sort of guide for members of the governing board.
Yeah, the extent of what I thought about it is that this is kind of an unusual situation in my mind, because I need a laptop if I'm going to be sitting at ACRPC offices in Middlebury, and I'm supposed to be hosting an executive committee meeting. Then I need a means of running the meeting, and so I needed a laptop. So that may be kind of a one-off. I'm kind of thinking the more common scenario is what was just described, which is no. Just because you're on the executive committee doesn't mean you're entitled to it. The other way we could do it is just to say it has to be put in, for any equipment purchases, office equipment purchases, perhaps in excess of X, have to be approved by the executive committee. And the thresholds that Ellie and I have been very effectively working on have been, I can purchase something up to $1,500, and if I can get Ellie to go along with it because she sees the value, then we can issue a PO for up to $3,000.
10,000.
Pardon me?
Isn't it? No. Is it 3,000?
Yeah, just 1,500 times 2. So it's come in handy, but and I suppose we could also just say Ellie has to approve it. The executive director, if can approve it up to $3,000 or something like that. I don't think there's. I think the only thing that I was really most concerned about is somehow or other there's got to be a way for us to continue to conduct our meetings, and that's kind of was the imperative that I was working around.
So I'm just copying and pasting from the current policy. So the current policy is discretionary purchases of $1,500 and under, that any of the purchasing agents, myself, Steve, and the treasurer, who's currently Cy, soon to be Lynn, we can do that as long as it's currently available in the approved budget. And then if any 2 of us agree on an expenditure, we have up to $10,000 before we have to come to the executive committee, but it must be part of the approved budget. So the approved budget for this year as well as for next year doesn't have anything for electronic equipment, because what we've been doing ever since I came along was that I brought my own hardware. I don't really want Maple Broadband owning my laptop or my desktop because it's kind of awkward when I have to give it back. and I do other things that are not work related on it, and I just want that flexibility, and it's fine. So it's great that you guys all agree that Maple Broadband could, but for myself as an employee, I prefer to own my own equipment, and then also it also creates, we don't have to deal with the accounting and depreciation and all of the cybersecurity aspect, and now we have to have software to make sure that, right, it's just a little bit easier with bring your own device. Anyway, Adam, you had your hand up.
I did. So I guess, in general, I don't believe Maple Broadband has any obligation to supply board members with equipment. But if for the purpose Maple Broadband to function, it makes sense to have additional equipment or spare equipment available, so that basically board members or someone looking to help Maple Broadband has the ability to do that. I think it just makes sense, especially given the business that we are in. Basically, portable connections, mobile connections, getting fiber out to people. I just think it makes sense to provide equipment for people that want to help you, if you want their help. And so while the general rule should probably be no, we're not giving everybody everything. I think making an exception and having a limited amount of equipment available for people that want to and need the equipment to help Maple Broadband makes a lot of sense for Maple Broadband. And I will tell you, at the Regional Planning Commission, there were some when things started to go electronic because of COVID and such, I had some commissioners that weren't very savvy and didn't have a lot of money, and we did make old computers available to them so that they could participate in our board meetings.
Yep. And so I think to that end, since I'm going to donate my old laptop, that will be there. And since we have it's fairly rare that we have executive committee meetings, and I won't be able to go to ACRPC myself, but that'll be available for anyone to host a public meeting. But also, I guess maybe part of the policy we're discussing here is we could also allow that laptop to be checked out if a board member needs to do something that requires them to be mobile. Because, I mean, at least I'm sitting here on my desktop. I presume Steve's on a desktop because he's not on a laptop. So most of what I do doesn't anyway require a laptop. It's just sometimes I go on vacation and I want to be able to work.
So what do we want to do for a policy?
I would suggest that the policy is that we do not purchase software for individual members of the executive committee or the board, period. And certainly now with Ellie's quite generous contribution, and other people can think about that when they upgrade their stuff. I wish I had thought about that when I upgraded 6 months ago. That we can have a laptop or two available for members who either need them for specific reasons. I think that makes sense, but I just think those things, that'll be rare, and we create some sort of system where if someone needs it and can borrow and return in a certain time frame, awesome, that's what we do. But I think the policy is that we are not purchasers of equipment for board members.
So how about just that? Our policy is Maple Broadband does not provide office equipment or software for their executive committee. Is it just executive committee or governing board too, I guess? And the executive director will do their best to accommodate requests, temporary requests for use of other equipment, other office equipment or something like that. The idea being that, no, we're not going to do it, but when we run into that kind of situation where it's needed, we will do our best to accommodate. I think it's the concept, because that doesn't really put us on the hook about it, because we'd be reaching out, maybe I'd be reaching out to Adam, which what I didn't in the first place, thinking, well, maybe they've got a crappy old laptop somewhere around knocking around at their office and I could borrow that. So to me, there's probably going to be a way to be able to accommodate a reasonable request, and we could bracket it by saying should, not shall, and that should cover us, perhaps. How's that sound?
I think that's fair.
I think that sounds good. For the purposes of completion of discussion, I know that we're talking about electronic equipment, but you mentioned earlier software, Sai, and this has been the situation ever since I came on as executive director, but I forget how many licenses we have. I think we have 7 licenses that are complete Microsoft Office licenses, and some of you guys are probably not even aware of that if you already have a Microsoft Office license through your work or that you own, Maple Broadband is also buying one for you. So maybe what we should do is have an audit of who all is actually using that full license, because, I'm using mine. I didn't want to have to go buy, I'm happy to buy my own laptop. I don't want to have to go buy my own version of Microsoft Office to do my work, because typically that is something that an employer does provide, because we might be able to save some money there. And then also Steve and I additionally have outbound calling. So we have a nationwide long distance plan because we're sometimes calling suppliers in other parts of the country. So we have that, and those are just, again, for full transparency, there is some software that we're providing, and some of it we may not actually need to be. So
that's a great point.
Yep.
We're changing our IT support person, Carl Seebecker, in conjunction with his departure from the executive committee. Justin Boyer, who's the Cornwall delegate, offered to step in and do that. I think you all heard that from Ellie a while ago. And I think the trick there is, it's another thing that has to be done is that Carl's license needs to go away, and we need to give Justin a license because he'll be needing to access our system to do any maintenance necessary.
Yep. Okay, so that's something I can actually ask him to do, is he can do that audit. Okay. Anything further on this subject?
Do we need to, how are we going to convert this discussion into a document?
Do we need to, does this need to be drafted into a statement of some sort? I'm not sure. Does it go into financial policies? Where does this live as a policy? Shannon?
So I think that what you had mentioned earlier, Sai, was adding this to the personnel policy that we're working on. I think that makes a lot of sense, even though what we're talking about with board members doesn't really fall under him. We're not employees per se, but I still think it might make the most sense to have it there. So whatever we agree upon, we can just it right into there.
Well, I had mentioned earlier that we might actually want to have a policy for board members around expectations. Like, we expect that you show up to meetings and whatever. We expect that you represent Maple Broadband, and we expect that you not, respond to spear phishing things and whatever all else might be in a policy like that.
It probably would be a good idea to have some sort of basic welcome to the governing board, and here are your rights and privileges and expectations, and include simple things, but maybe to make them understood. I mean, most any other nonprofit board, Lynn, I'm sure you can speak to this. You come onto a nonprofit board, the first thing you get is the big welcome to our board, and here's who else is on it, and here's who they are, and here's what we know about them, and here are the things that you're going to do, and here are the committees that we have, and yada, yada, yada. So it may be something that we want to develop moving forward, just to, because the people you have on your governing board aren't going to stay around forever. So.
Yeah, when we first got started at the very, very beginning, when we were trolling for delegates, Adam cooked up a document like that about what was expected, do we expect to see our delegates and our executive committee members do? And I have a copy of that. I think what I'd be most interested in, I think that'd be a good starting point for it. And I think you could stretch some words there and say it's part of the personnel policy and just don't call it. Yeah, I don't know how we might want to do that, but I'm also thinking that I'd love to throw it over the wall to you, Shannon, just ask you to work with that and find a way to integrate it, and then we can figure out later when you've got something that we want to talk about. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, and yeah, I've been taking notes as we've been talking about this. That yeah, it could be like another chapter within that document or something. So, yeah, and I plan on. I know Sai's been anxious for me to get her some more information on it. It's been a busy month or two, but things are starting to lighten up. So I plan to work on that fairly soon.
Great. Thanks, Shannon.
Sure.
Very much appreciated. I'll send that document on to you in a minute.
What's the document called, Steve? I want to add this to the parking lot.
Yeah, we talked about the network management agreement, but that's it. I think there's nothing else.
Steve, what's that document called that you're sending to Shannon?
It's like employee responsibility or something like that.
You're talking about one of board member responsibilities.
For the board members.
Yeah. I was just gonna jump in and say that, and maybe you do this already, but you know, when a new board member is sort of being onboarded, that they have that's one of the first things they're given, right? Is what are the expectations, or you know, I'm thinking about, I've been on the co-op board for 10 years and we have an orientation, and a lot of it is, you know, about speaking with one voice and you know, around confidentiality or whatever, but sort of you know, just guidelines for being a board member. And maybe something like that exists for staff, you know, as a staff document. But I think the board document ideally would be separate and apart, and part of bringing somebody new on.
I agree.
Yep, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just looking on our website and even our policies and teams. I can't find anything about board member responsibilities on there.
Yeah.
No, we don't really have anything like that at this point.
Yeah, so we should.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you know, I think it's more even just, I don't know, behavior's a strong word, but that just people understand, you know, what are the agreements we hold with one another about being board members. And I think that stuff needs to be explicit, because it never feels good to kind of mess up and then be told, oh, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any policy around attendance or anything like that, but you know, it's a place, you know, it doesn't need to be a lengthy document, but just something as a guideline to new people.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Well, I've added that to the parking lot. Okay. So next up on the agenda is the parking lot. So Steve has mentioned where we are with the Middlebury Hub, which is a little bit updated from when I sent this out. And is there anything else anyone wants to call attention to on the parking lot? So I've added network management agreement and then board member guidelines. So with myself and Shannon as the owners, respectively. Okay. Other business. Does anyone have other business?
I will just tell you that the Cornwall Select Board, I think, met a night or so ago, and on the agenda was to make me the alternate delegate from Cornwall. So presumably that all went nicely. I haven't heard back from Tanya, but I just wanted to update Steve, I know, who sent me a lovely note to remind me to take care of this. So it is in process, and I will let you know how
Great,
that
thank you.
works.
Okay. All right. So then the next thing is our future meeting. So we've already talked about that. Our next meeting is January 23rd at 8 o'clock in the morning. Steve will be at the ACRPC. My laptop will be delivered to the ACR. Adam, is the ACRPC open normal hours tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll be through with that tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, by the way, Ellie, for that contribution of a laptop.
Well, my pleasure. It actually saves me the trouble of finding a worthy place to donate it to, because it's in perfectly good shape, but I always procrastinate doing the research or trying to figure out where to donate things. It's just one more thing. So I probably would have sat collecting dust for a while. So I'm quite happy it's going to have a good home. All right. So if there's nothing else, then we can adjourn, and happy holidays and happy new year, and see you all in January.
Thanks, Ellie. Have a
Night,
great
all.
vacation.
Good night, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Bye.